Hello, I'm Micah Smith from Denver 7, and welcome to Denver Decides. This community partnership is dedicated to accessible and transparent elections. The partnership includes the League of Women Voters of Denver, Interneighborhood Cooperation, and is presented by Denver 8 TV. Our mission today is to present a candidate forum in anticipation of the general election coming up on Tuesday, November 3rd. Among other offices, this election includes the candidates vying to represent Colorado's 2nd Judicial District as district attorney. The 2nd Judicial District encompasses Denver County. Our format is a pretty standard one. We'll begin with opening statements that will be followed by rounds of questions that have been submitted by the organizers of the forum. Since we do have a time limit, we may not be able to get to all of these submitted questions. All of the responses will be timed. Our countdown timer is right out front for your easy viewing. So let's begin by meeting the candidates on the ballot, hoping to represent Colorado's 2nd Judicial District as your district attorney. The candidates are standing left to right facing the cameras in the order that their names will appear on the November ballot. So beginning at my right is Beth McCann. And on my left is William F. Robinson III. Welcome, both of you, to this forum. And one more note to the candidates on behalf of our viewers. We sincerely urge you to be honest, direct, and forthright to help the voters distinguish one candidate from another. We will begin with 1-minute opening statements from each candidate. We will proceed in ballot order with these statements. So, once again, starting at my right, Beth McCann, will begin with your opening statement.
Thank you, Micah. Hello, Denver. I'm Beth McCann. I am your current Denver District Attorney, and I have been for about the last 4 years. During that time, I've taken advantage of the opportunity to begin some new programs in Denver, consistent with what we talked about during my campaign. For example, I've started an adult diversion program, which allows people to get into that program. If they complete it, the case is never filed, so it's a pre-file program. I also partnered with the Conflict Center in North Denver to start a very robust restorative justice program, which so far is showing great success. We've worked with the courts to establish ways for people with mental health and substance abuse issues to be treated differently than going through the regular criminal justice system. I'm also quite proud of the firearms relinquishment program, which keeps firearms out of the hands of people who've committed domestic violence offenses. I've established advisory councils from neighborhoods, people that I meet with monthly to talk about issues that the community is concerned about. And I've also partnered with a professor to study the impact of race on our cases. So thank you very much. I look forward to our debate.
And now an opening statement from William F. Robinson.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having this. They ought to be running the federal one too. My motto is the taxpayers of one-party Denver deserve having a libertarian district attorney watchdog. That being the case, we have, I would keep the grand juries busy all the time, looking into the cost overruns and the conflict of interests that are going into DIA, the Convention Center, the Center for the Performing Arts, and all the other things that are going on, and then we should take action to stop the washing of hands.
All right, thank you, Mr. Robinson. Now our first question for the candidates, and each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. We will start in reverse order from the opening statements, so we will begin with William Robinson. If the George Floyd incident had occurred in Denver, what would you have done as DA in response?
I think what they did was you get the information out that is presented to the grand jury and quickly, and then and they should have. So I wouldn't then the other thing that they should do is to take and back up that until any mob that is trying to overturn that before justice takes its place is very, very troubling to me. The other thing I would do, though, is I think the police unions, just like the teachers union, keep us from getting rid of inept people that shouldn't be in the force or shouldn't be teaching.
All right, thank you. Let's turn to Beth McCann for her answer to that question.
Thank you. The George Floyd situation was heart-wrenching, and it was exhausting and so depressing to watch even part of what went on that night in Minneapolis, that afternoon. So what I would do is gather the evidence, which is what we do in officer-involved shootings, and apply the law and make a decision about whether to file charges. In that case, based on what I have seen and what I know about it, I would have filed charges against the officers involved. What they did appeared to be a deliberate killing of a man who was in their custody, already handcuffed, and was indicating to them that he couldn't breathe. So that behavior is totally inexcusable. And as district attorney, I would have taken quick and effective action to bring justice to that family.
Thank you. Now our next question for the candidates, and we will begin with Ms. McCann. Could you please describe your philosophy regarding balancing victims' rights and the rights of the accused in prosecutions?
Sure, thank you. So, as part of our responsibility, we do provide a voice for victims of crime in the DA's office. We do prosecute. Our major job is to prosecute criminal behavior. And we have what we call victim advocates in our office that work directly with the victims of crime to help them get through what can be a very frustrating and grueling process. They work with them to secure resources they may need and also to understand how the process is going to work. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, we have defendants who may have been subject to trauma, extensive trauma in their backgrounds. They may have alcohol or substance abuse problems. So we look at them also and make a decision about what is an appropriate way to handle this case. There are clearly people who need to be in prison. There are some who don't need to be in prison.
William, your opportunity to answer that question.
Those that are, I would end the practice of overcharging that goes on in prosecutorial offices, because by overcharging and then getting a plea to a lesser offense is really unconstitutional. So the charge that the person is facing should be commensurate with the crime that was actually committed. And I very much like what Beth just said about restorative justice. I think in instances where people have been harmed, if the harmer can make restitution to the victim, that is a much better thing than giving people a criminal record.
Mr. Robinson, you will be first to answer this next question. Please describe what you have done or would do if elected to address racial and ethnic disparities in charges and convictions in Denver.
As district attorney, I will be bound to obey the law as it presently exists. However, I will use the district attorney's office as a bully pulpit to loudly proclaim that the war on drugs, all drugs should, which the Libertarian Party believes should be ended. More than 50,000 Mexicans have died as a result of the war on drugs that is going on in Mexico. And so when it comes to that end of the thing, I would enforce the law as it presently exists and try to get the disparity between the different charges of the racially ended.
Now, Ms. McCann, your answer to that question.
Thank you. When I started in the office, I recognized that the whole issue of race and the interplay with the criminal justice system is a very serious issue that we need to be looking at very closely. So when I started, I bought the book, The New Jim Crow, for every member of the staff. And we then had discussion groups in my office about it. And the point was not to say that people are racist. The point was to say, let's look at the impact that what we do every day in the courtrooms has on communities, and particularly communities of color. We need to be talking about these things. We need to be thinking about these things. And then I partnered with a professor from UCD who is bringing interns into our office to evaluate how cases are handled and to look and see if there is discrepancy based on race so that we can address that and make some changes if in fact that is what we find.
Now let's continue with our questions for our candidates vying for the office of District Attorney representing Colorado's 2nd Judicial District. Mr. Robinson, you will answer first. Should the number and type of cases taken to trial change during a pandemic? And if so, why? If not, why?
Well, there again, I think if we don't overcharge and depending on what the evidence is, I think I'm experiencing now as a defense, legal defense attorney in criminal cases that it's very difficult. If you want to have, I think it's unfair to the defendant in some ways. If everybody is wearing a mask, that's hardly a way to be able to. It's difficult. I think we've got way too many laws on the books that we ought to get rid of, and but those laws that are there that should be there, I think there's nothing. We have to try them.
Now, Ms. McCann, your answer to that question.
Yes, thank you. So what we did in the beginning of the COVID situation is we worked with the courts and with the public defenders and the sheriff's department to look at people who were in our jails. And we were able to reduce the jail population by about 40%, especially during those initial stages, because we recognized that holding people in those confined situations when this is such an infectious disease was not a good thing. And so we've agreed to many more PR bonds and more early releases. In terms of trials, we have also I've encouraged the deputies in the office to resolve cases as soon as possible so that we don't end up with as many going to trial. The courts did not hold jury trials until the beginning of August, and we have now been trying jury trials. And actually this morning, the chief judge was telling me that in her questioning of the jurors who've come in, none of them have expressed safety concerns. So it's been working well.
Next question from our sponsoring partners, and we begin again with William Robinson. Is the bail process fair for the poor and minorities, and does it need to be changed?
I would, depending, first of all, if the alleged crime would statutorily merit a bail, I think I am not in favor of changing that. The defendant who's incarcerated has the benefit of the public defender. His trials are moved forward in the case docket, and if he's convicted, he gets credit for the time he's already served in jail. So I think it's this catch and release that's going on now, I am not in favor of.
Beth McCann, your answer to that question.
Yes, actually, I think it's been really interesting during this COVID situation because we have been agreeing to lower bonds and more PR bonds for the safety of staff as well as the defendants. And so we're tracking that, which I hope will demonstrate that we are holding too many people in jail waiting trial, and that people that we're releasing are not out committing violent crimes and so forth. I think it's a balancing process. We have to look at the safety of the community and the likelihood that the person is going to show up again in court. We weigh that versus the risk of putting someone in prison or holding someone in jail, not prison, in jail, pending trial while they're still presumed to be innocent. And so what we try to do in my office is balance those in a fair and just way. We should not be holding people because they can't make a money bond where a more wealthy person could.
For the next few rounds of questioning, it's going to be the candidate's turn to ask the questions of one another. Each of you will ask your opponent a question, and hopefully they will have an answer for you. We will reverse the ballot order and alternate who starts each round. We'll begin with William Robinson. Mr. Robinson, you will ask Ms. McCann a question, and Ms. McCann, you will have 1 minute to answer.
There was some time ago in Civic Center, there was a group of citizens who staged a rally in favor of the police department, and they were attacked by others. I haven't seen anything in the newspaper about how that's coming along. Can you enlighten the citizens of Denver on that subject?
Sure. Thank you for the question. We have filed a case just recently against one of the people who was attacking the people who were there rallying. We are looking at individual cases. It's taking a very long time for any of the protest cases to come to us because the officers are spending the detectives are spending a huge amount of time going through videos. And what we're finding is we often can't really tell who did what when because there's a lot of chaos and there are it's hard to identify who's doing the action. When we can identify the person, we will file the charges. We have filed about 25 cases against protesters for various things, breaking windows, carrying weapons, defacing property. But we are continuing to look at more of them to see if we can prove any of those cases.
Now, Ms. McCann, it's your turn to ask a question of William.
All right. What are your plans on how you would handle officer-involved shootings?
Well, I've already indicated one thing. Officers are public servants, and therefore there shouldn't be police unions. So and that prevents because they have readily available, as I've said, you can't get rid of incompetent policemen, and you can't get rid of incompetent teachers because of the teachers union. So I think I do away with that first. The second thing, I think it's important to have an independent citizens group that would look into any alleged misbehavior, and I think also keeping good records and having the equipment they now carry helps identify them.
Okay, now Ms. McCann, it's your turn to ask a question of Mr. Robinson. And William, as before, you will have 1 minute to answer.
How do you plan to, or do you plan to increase alternatives to prison for people with alcohol, substance abuse issues? What kinds of programs do you plan to start?
Well, I think there's already programs in place, and as I've already commended you for some of the diversions that you're doing. And I think where there's no criminal activity involved in the thing, it's a victimless crime. Then it's driving while drunk that's the problem, not getting drunk in your own home. And so I wouldn't too much greatly change those sort of things than the way it is presently being done.
William, your turn to ask Beth another question, and you will have 1 minute to answer.
Well, I mentioned in my opening statement about Denver being a one-party town, and there's no question, I think, that you would dispute that. And we have cost overruns. Bill Goodstein wrote a very fine book entitled DIA and Other Scams. So what in the airport that was built halfway to Wyoming, that was supposed to be just farmland, wasn't going to cost very much, but the insiders found out about it, and there was also, it's cost more and more, and it's constantly going on, and you've got cost overruns all the time in the different places that the city's spending a lot of money. I didn't mention the stock show.
And William, we need you to get to your question, please.
Oh, okay. Then, so my question is, how's the grand jury, or what steps are you presently taking with all these interlocking groups? There's basically, as we all know, one law firm in Denver that runs an awful lot of things too.
So we have our economic crimes unit in the office,
Right.
Which is staffed by several experienced and talented investigators, as well as a number of our top attorneys. And so when we get a complaint of some kind of white-collar crime, it's investigated in our office. It can also be investigated by the Denver Police Department, but often we do our own investigations for white-collar crime. And we have to look at what the facts are and what the law is. For example, a cost overrun on a contract wouldn't be a crime. If we can show fraud, that they somehow obtained the contract by misrepresenting, committing fraud, then we might have an actionable case. But we have to take what the law says and take a look at what the facts are. And we do file white-collar crime cases constantly. We use the grand jury for many of those cases when they're complex cases. We do use the grand jury. Our economic crimes unit presents cases to them. And so we do, when we get those complaints, we do a full investigation and make a decision about whether we can prosecute, or we can also bring in the federal government as well to investigate.
Let's continue with another one-on-one round. Mr. Robinson, your turn to ask a question of Beth, and as before, you will have 1 minute to answer.
What is your position with regard to trying to end the war on drugs, and also preserving the right of citizens to bear arms to protect themselves, even those that, let's say, maybe what my experience has been when you have a domestic case, you get a prohibition against that person bearing arms. What do you do so that all people have a right to defend themselves in their own homes?
Well, the law says you have the right to defend yourself in your own home. So when we have a case, and we've had a few of these this year, where we're confronted with a situation where someone is defending their family or themselves from immediate harm, we don't file a criminal case against that person for shooting someone or using physical force. We look at what the situation is and what the law is. Now, I feel pretty strongly about people who have protection orders against them in domestic violence cases and are charged with domestic violence offenses, the law says they are not entitled to possess and purchase firearms. So that's why we started the firearm program in my office, to make sure that those people don't have firearms during the pendency of that case. And I believe that we are saving lives because of that, because we know of the increased risk in domestic violence cases for homicides of victims.
Beth, your turn to ask William a final question, and William, you will have 1 minute to answer.
So, William, what do you bring to the DA's office? What is it that you want to do, and why are you a good fit for this office?
Well, again, I think, as I said in my opening statement, the taxpayers of Denver, be they Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Greens, need to be defended when we have a one-party city, and so I would keep the. I think I would have the grand jury much more active in terms of what's going on at the National Western Stock Show, the Center for the Performing Arts, the Convention Center, and DIA, just to name a few. I would also be vigorously seeing that the $1 million, I realize it's state property when it came to the state capitol, but we've had $1 million worth of vandalism. That should be paid back to the citizens of Denver.
And thank you, William. Your time is up. That brings us to the end of our Q&A segment, and we move now to closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute for a closing statement, and we will reverse the order of the opening statements, which means we will begin with William F. Robinson. Mr. Robinson, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
Well, I would continue with my answer that was posed to the last question. It seems to me that the district attorney, there's quite a few deputies and chief assistances and so on, and I would try to detail them into looking into particularly the fiscal crimes that I don't think are being vigorously pursued. The conflict of interest that exists where people own interlocking corporations and different things like that. I think just for DIA, one ought to pull out my fellow East High graduate, Phil Goodstein, and DIA and other scams details that very beautifully. And I think these things are going on in the other places. So that's what I'd get my district attorneys doing.
And now a closing statement from Beth McCann.
Thank you. Well, thank you for listening. This is a really important position in this city, and I would love to have your support to be reelected. One of the things that we haven't really talked about a lot tonight is the whole interplay between race and the criminal justice system and fairness and what's going on right now nationally and locally in terms of justice. I believe that in my office we strive every day to do justice. We do prosecute criminal behavior, but we also look at alternatives for people who don't need to be in jail or prison, and particularly people who are suffering from some public health issue. But I also recognize that the system is not always fair to everyone, and that there's a large portion of our community that does not feel that they get justice. And that is something that I'm very committed to working on. We need to have faith in this institution and in the ability of the system to be fair. So I will work very hard on that issue if you re-elect me as your district attorney. Thank you.
And I would like to thank both of you for participating in this forum. Our thanks also to our Denver Decides partners, which include Interneighborhood Cooperation and the League of Women Voters of Denver. Denver Decides is presented by Denver 8 TV. Remember, Election Day is November 3rd. Make your voice heard, make sure you're registered, and be sure to vote. For complete election information online, go to denverdecides.org. I'm Micah Smith from Denver 7 News. Thanks for joining us.